talk about race in BC film. I'm Sabrina Rani Furminger. In our last episode, we spoke with BIPOC actors who have pursued their careers in an industry that was often less than welcoming, and who have worked to be the change they want to see. Today, we'll speak with BIPOC filmmakers who are committed to sharing stories that represent the breadth and depth of our diverse communities. Join us. Joella Cabalu is a documentary filmmaker and producer based in Vancouver.
Let's begin with white supremacy.
Why not?
Why not? When I had emailed you about this, you had said that there was some power in even saying those words and in using them in this context. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, just the power of just naming it. I think for myself, growing up as an immigrant, living in the Lower Mainland for 30 years now, and still feeling othered. There's sometimes something that I'm learning, this double consciousness of like, is it me? Should I, is the reasons why I'm like always in roles of like supporting other people, whether that was in my previous life as a admin assistant, and never being the leader of my own life. Is that just something that I've been socialized, or is that just my personality? And just being able to name that there is this bigger framework at play named white supremacy. It's like, oh, okay, this is what I'm playing into. And it's not, I spend so much of my life being a people pleaser, trying to not take up too much space, which is really kind of impossible to do as a very petite person. But in some ways, just trying to just invisibilize myself. And so it's only becoming clear to me now. It's like, oh, that is what is the manifestation of living under white supremacy. Yeah. There's power in naming it, because I think for a lot of people like myself, we doubt ourselves, and maybe it's like, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
Like, no,
like we've been gaslit. We've been gaslit
exactly.
into being like, is it there? No, it is. It's totally there.
Yeah.
It's there. What about in the context of documentary filmmaking? Like, what connection do you see between our local documentary world and white supremacy?
I think there's like a spectrum of white supremacy and how it manifests itself and intersects with capitalism, how we run our sets, what projects get financed, who we see at networking events online and in person. And at a personal level, when I was starting out in the industry, I graduated from Langara College in documentary production, and I started early on to sign up for as many member organizations as possible. And I found my kind of community at Documentary Organization of Canada, the BC chapter. And it just was like-minded people who are making documentaries. And people often think of nonfiction filmmakers as being, so salt of the earth, we want to do good. But it was something that I just noticed. And when I was attending these events, that for the most part, I would be kind of the only Asian woman there, or the only non-white person there. And again, what I was talking about of I would think to myself, Joella, don't think so much about the race part. These are all, good people, filmmakers. but it's just something that was nagging at me. And kind of early on in my career, I was invited to be a board member of DOC. And a very big part of it was why I said yes, was because of that representation. I wanted other people who looked like me to at least see they have a place in this community that is predominantly white. And I think that's kind of a hard pill for the documentary community to swallow, because we're so well-intentioned
Yeah.
and working towards raising awareness of social issues. But there's an imbalance. You know, thinking about the institutions that fund stories their leadership had been historically white. And, you know, there's this unconscious bias of like, what do Canadian audiences want to see? And, you know, and that's, you know, largely decided by these decision makers at these institutions. So you get, I have been like socialized to think that stories about white people, directed by white people, is what Canadian stories are. So, you know, part of what's happening right now, this cultural shift of really trying to disrupt that and trying to call attention to who are the leaders, who are the people who are making those decisions. Does it represent really the makeup of our country? And so that is from, you know, the top down, but then also really thinking more meaningfully about who is creating the stories, who is directing. And, you know, there has been this shift towards, you know, having gender parity, but also this initiative to have representation behind and in front of the screen. But I think we're still in early days of it. Like, we're still thinking of it superficially, of like, you know, please check this box if you are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. I would like to see it, that it's more rooted in relationships. So that, you know, in the future, that we're really prioritizing building relationships with communities as filmmakers. And because I often hear from filmmakers who are white, it's like, oh, I feel like I can't tell stories about communities that are not my own. And I would like to, as first, to move to a place where it's like, yeah, certainly you can, but I think you have to really earn that trust from those communities. And even then is also to ask yourself, this is something I tell other directors, and when I teach workshops, is like, why? Why is it that you want to tell this story? And something I have to contend with is like, is it an ego thing? You know, like, it really takes, you know, giving up, really challenging your ego to give up the creative vision to somebody else. Is asking yourself, like, is there somebody else from that community who can tell it better?
Do you ever sit and think to yourself, like, my work is going to be part of dismantling white supremacy in the film and television industry? Or, you know, like, what role do your thoughts about your BIPOC audience members play in the decisions that you make as a filmmaker and as a producer?
It's such a huge responsibility. And sometimes it can be so overwhelming and, you know, in some ways crippling. And for this new documentary that I'm directing about interracial relationships between Filipinos and white people, I originally came in with this idea of like, I want to do this survey of different kinds of relationships and different kinds of couples. And it just became clear to me that I cannot do justice to all of that. That this is just one film in hopefully a canon of films. And that I can only be authentic and honor the participants who are featured in the film to their story. And so that kind of helps to lift the burden a bit, but it's that needs, with that, I feel like there's a sense of responsibility to lift up other filmmakers of Filipino descent, of Black, Indigenous, Asian, Canadian filmmakers.
Yeah.
That I do not want to like have a monopoly on Filipino films, and it's that is how we're going to have a very rich media landscape. Is that we have all these different kinds of films that are speaking maybe to similar issues, but created in different ways, and they're in conversation with each other.
What willingness do you see from funding bodies and those in key leadership positions in the various hubs that provide support to documentary filmmakers, to be part of making this industry safe and inclusive for all, a place where everybody can be seen?
I think our major institutions like Telefilm, Canada Media Fund, the National Film Board, CBC, I feel there has been this cultural shift where they have to be transparent and accountable now. And I feel like they're still working through it. And it's an unfortunate thing that our community of filmmakers who are not white, that we kind of suffer the brunt of that labor of having to call out, to kind of poke. Is like, this is not what we meant. Like, this is what you said, but this is not what you're doing. But at the same time, it's like, that's also like an added responsibility. We're not going to make any change if we don't continually challenge, but also understand that there's so much, we want to go to whatever my future I was describing before, but there's so many steps involved along the way, and a deep commitment that's required from those institutions.
A lot of people fancy themselves, describe themselves as allies to BIPOC creators. What do you want or expect from those people who describe themselves as allies?
I'm reluctant to call myself an ally. And that came about with my first film, It Runs in the Family, which was about the queer members of my extended family in the Philippines and in the US and Canada. And I owe a great gratitude to the queer community for so much of my learning about inclusivity and how to be equitable. And I applaud those folks who want to be in solidarity with racialized communities. And something that I've learned is to decenter yourself in that narrative. And part of that for me is like, being called an ally is, you have to earn that. People who want to be in solidarity with that is to decenter yourself, ask your questions, have that real talk with yourself about the work that you might be doing. Is it a performance, or is there substance to it? Are you putting in the time and being vulnerable to hearing what your friends and your communities are saying, and to accept maybe there's more that you can do?
Kashif Pasta is a writer, director, producer, and co-creator of the hit digital series Welcome to Surrey for TELUS and Dunya Media.
How have you dealt with white supremacy in your career? And has this response changed in the last few years? You know, because I have had people in this series, you know, argue that the way that racism manifests has changed, you know, that there's in some ways more gaslighting than there was beforehand. So I'm curious about the changes that you've seen.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say like, has my response changed over the years? And I think it has. I don't know if my reality's changed as much, but the way I see it has changed in as much as I had fewer negative interactions with people because I wasn't trying to be a part of those spaces in the first place. I was like, why do I need this person's approval? Why would I need this organization's approval? So I'm doing things my own way. And in that sense, I didn't have a ton of direct negative experience where I can tell you this person said this thing to me and it was really problematic. Like, so from my point of view, it was like, no, this is all kind of, this is going great. But the reason my response has kind of changed over time is when I think about it, the fact that I was not going for certain opportunities or not trying to be in certain spaces, that is that supremacy functioning, right? Like there's a glory and a glamour to the independent life and to the thing of like, we don't want to be part of the system and we're gonna be separate from it. But at the same time, the system is very happy for us to not be part of it. Like if the narrative needs to be a lionizing, like, yeah, go be Indian, go hustle and do your thing. Like, let's like leave our money for us, right? So in that sense, it's been there. And then now I start to see it in those more subtle ways. I mean, again, like I said, a lot of it comes down to what gets through in the first place. A lot of it, you know, what stories get to be told, because you know, it's in the form of pitching, like you're filtering it through that person's point of view, right? And if it doesn't make sense to them, they don't feel like it's relevant to them, suddenly it can't happen. Luckily, I've also had really good experiences. I don't mean to sound like I'm advertising for them, but like when I worked with TELUS for our digital series, the really good experience was we had really great execs who did have a broader point of view. Kim Guys, as an Asian woman who's the executive on this whole organization at the time, she was actually pushing us to be more authentic. She saw our pilot and was like, it feels like you're trying to make something for white people. And like, we didn't think we were doing that. So it was like almost offensive, right? But for her to say that, I was like, whoa, what does she mean? Like we tried to, but the whole thing was, it was a network trying to push us to be more authentic, trying to say almost like, not I understand this too much, but going, no, actually we want you to be a little bit more free. So that was kind of the positive side of it. And again, even that push was a bit of unlearning, because we consciously or unconsciously were trying to do something that, you know, we're filtering our own experiences through what we assume someone else's experiences are, so that we think that they can see us as legitimate. So you're doing all this like double, triple, quadruple thinking. And in that case, we were lucky to have an exec who was like, no, I see those layers. We want to get closer to who you actually are. But a lot of times you do have to jump through those hoops just to be able to kind of get at a nugget of your truth. And that becomes a really big challenge, because you can't just say what you think. You need to say we need to say what the other person thinks of you in order to be worthy of being on screen.
So what do you think our goals should be here? And I say our goals as people who are committed to anti-racism work, specifically as it relates to film and TV. Is it to dismantle white supremacy and build something new in its place, or to bend and adapt? This is me bending and adapting what we already have so that it serves everyone.
Yeah, I think, and
because what you're describing seems to be more of the latter.
I think the answer is all things at all times, which sounds like a cop-out, but I really do mean it, because I don't think there's any one solution. I don't think there's any one problem really either. And so I think the idea is like, there's a very clever way to explain this that will come up like an hour after we finish this interview. But in terms of like, I think the answer really is both. And it's this thing of like, taking advantage of the resources that are out there, and kind of, as a taxpayer and a citizen, or even just a participant in the creative economy, like demanding your fair share of it, but also at the same time, setting yourself up in a way that we don't need it. And so that's where I think the answer is kind of both, because I think working with it's good in a sense, especially as we talk about Canada's public funding, right? And that's our funds, right? And even when, organizations will say like, oh, we're dedicating 20% to BIPOC filmmakers, 25%, that's really great. It's also kind of reserving 75% for non-BIPOC filmmakers, right? Like it's doing both things at the same time. So demanding more opportunities is really good. But also if we only did that, then we are fully reliant on that system as well.
Yeah.
And that I think transcends ethnic and racial background as well, in terms of, I think a lot of programs, government programs are meant to exist to fill a market gap. And it can be very easy to start to rely on them like they are the market.
Yeah.
And that tends to limit Canadian content overall, just globally and regardless of your background as a creator. And so that's where I think both is really the answer, because as I see it in other countries, especially if we look just down south to the States, where they don't have a publicly funded process, they only have the private markets. And that has its advantages, but you see independent filmmakers in the States, like if they only had that little funds to fill the gap, they could do so much more. And we have that kind of really cool system where we have access to private markets in theory, right? Like, yeah, anybody can do that, / you can go down to the States, but like the fact that we also have those market gap filling things, like those can really be the things that boost us to be able to take the next step or work with other countries that have similar processes. So a lot of countries do. And so, yeah, that's where I think both becomes the solution. Because the problem has the system we're trying to dismantle, as you said, it doesn't have a single point of pressure either. It is patient. It is all consuming. It has people in every department. It's in your mind. It's physical. It's in design. Like it is not a single prong issue. And so I think it requires kind of an all hands on deck multi-pronged solution as well.
Why is it important to address and dismantle white supremacy in BC film?
I think it's important to dismantle white supremacy because it has a negative effect on all of us. It limits everybody. It's not, it doesn't really just affect any one group. It traps the people who perpetuate it as well. And of course it traps the people that it oppresses as well. But I think like it's important to dismantle because they're kind of these like blinders we have on that blocks us to the opportunities of the world. We have an incredible culture, right? Like we are in a province that has so many connections to the world through different migrant communities. There's often a complaint, especially, this was I remember in the 90s, this was a really big thing. It's still a big thing of like, what is Canadian identity and what is it beyond not American, right? And there's a negative side to that because like, what is our identity? The cool thing is all these migrant communities come in and establish themselves and to a certain extent get to retain really strong elements of their original culture. And that creates really strong global connections around the world. And so we have this province where we have incredible connections to the whole world. And if we put on these blinders, it's like, it's just limiting us to, I don't even know why. Like, I don't need to speak ill about what's being made. That's great, but like, it limits what we can make because we won't open up our eyes to what's out there because we don't see it as equal or even and God forbid we ever see anything as better than, right? And that's really where the discomfort starts to come in. Well, we could fight for equality, but that, like that's where supremacy starts to come in. It's like you can get close. There's an asymptote, right? If you remember like grade 10 math, right? You get as close as possible to the line, but don't you dare touch it or cross it, right? And that is literally, again, going back to the math thing, and I don't mean to like perpetuate an Asian stereotype, but like it's a limit, right? And so what's the benefit of taking off a limit is there's no limit, like,
There's no
limit. And it's uncomfortable to admit that there might be some stuff that you don't know. But there's really exciting things on the other side of that leap as well.
Yeah. That does sound incredibly exciting.
I think what I really want and expect from people who identify as allies of BIPOC filmmakers is a couple of things. One is to really do the hard work of decentering yourself. I think that's a really big thing. A lot of times it's like, how do I help and how do I feel better about this? And really, really drilling down into what the actual issue is as specifically as possible. And when you're setting a goal for yourself, you don't just go like, I want to be I want to be more fit. You know, that's going to lead to some failure. But if you go like, I want to run twice a week, I want to do this specific, hit this calorie goal, whatever, right? And I think when it comes to things like being an ally of BIPOC filmmakers, that's a nice statement. It's not very specific, right?
Yeah.
And when you drill down into what the issue is, it is important to look at, do you want to help or do you want to feel better? And this is a thing that affects a lot of us on the, I'll identify as more on the left politically, and on that more like liberal left side. A lot of times it's just about comfort. If the right person gets elected, we can go to brunch again, right? We don't need to actually think about, did anything change? Yeah. And that flows through to the industry as well. So if you want to feel good, that's a different process than if you want to actually make a difference. And actually making a difference often involves decentering yourself. I've seen people literally pass on opportunities to give someone else an opportunity. That's like costing you, right? Yeah. And often that has great benefits as well. And hope, you know, I'm a believer in karma, etc. But in the moment, you do have to pass up on some things. You do have to put other people up. You do have to see things from other people's points of view.
Let's talk about joy.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in speaking about being joyful and pursuing art in the face of racism. I see art as something incredibly joyful for the audience, but also potentially for the artist. What role does joy play in your craft, and how has it changed over the course of your life as an artist?
Oh man, it's everything for me. I mean, this is how I got into being interested in film in the first place. I would watch, I was like 2-3 years old, watching shows with my sisters and thinking that all TV shows were real, and Saved by the Bell was real kids in a real high school. And then finding out that like, this is fake and it's made up and I don't understand, like this is their job, and they're just like, their job is to make people happy, and being like, oh, I want to trick other 3-year-olds. Like I want to make people happy. And it started just there, right? Of like,
it was Saved by the Bell. That hasn't come up to here before. That is phenomenal.
Really thought it was a real high school, right? I thought animated characters were like real people. Like I didn't see Brad Pitt in the world, so I assumed Mickey Mouse was walking around somewhere too, just like waving at people. I had to have my sister like explain keyframe animation and stuff. But the idea that it was all made up, like that's where film and media started for me. It started from sitcoms, 3-camera sitcoms from my family. I was born not that long after my family moved to Canada, and their way of like understanding the culture they moved into was, you know, primetime comedies on network TV and stuff, and really getting a sense of things. So for me, you're so much more open to learning, to just having a good time. Like, I mean, it's entertainment for a reason, right? And I think you actually open up more and you think more when you're laughing than when you're scared or when you're sad. And a lot of times when it comes to stories of creators of color or from BIPOC filmmakers, you're really asked to perform your trauma and your tragedy on screen and to bleed onto the application. And really, for me, it really, on a systemic level, it really feels like it's a little too close to begging for me. Like, it's like, you need to be needy enough to get this. You can't come from a position of strength, right? It's like, no, please. Like, I have all this hurt and all this pain, and I've presented it in the way that you, for your rubric. And please, is my pain painful enough to deserve a career, right? And that to me is like not a great position to be in. And there's important stories about trauma. There's important like stories that are just purely dramatic, and those should be told. But it's a challenge for me when it's like you have to choose between BIPOC storytelling or being happy. Like that's the structure that we're setting up, right? It's binary, and the idea that like, can you be Muslim and cheerful, right? Like, and things like, yeah, in life, yeah, that's what life is. But like even in the most stereotypical sense, like, I mean, Emily V. Gordon, who co-wrote The Big Sick, she was talking about this because her husband, Nanjiani's Muslim. She's like, you never see a picture like a Muslim on a roller coaster. Like, it's not a thing that you see in media, right? And like, it's something I hadn't thought about because, you know, you see it in life, but that's not what's getting out there. And my big concern isn't so much what other people think. It's not about the stereotypes and like, what do different groups think about each other? I'm really concerned with how people see themselves and how do you see the world and your place in it? And so again, when we talk about, can you be happy and BIPOC at the same time? There's a very dangerous, very negative aspect to like, to let's just call it white people thinking that all Muslims are angry all the time. I mean, we've seen the lives lost to that assumption. But also for me, it's like, when you have that situation where even as a filmmaker, you're like, oh, I gotta be BIPOC or happy or Muslim or cheerful. It's like, how does that affect the people's brains themselves? How is that let's call it colonization being internalized? How's that racism being internalized to the point where you literally have people then going, oh, it's not a problem. Like, this is just how things are, right? Because it gets so internalized, and you start to see that shift when people go from like, you know, high school through university, and you get trained in a process, and you start to go like, people either are comfortable embracing their culture, or a lot of times people feel there isn't an issue. It's just that they've managed to like push it out of the way. And it's like, oh, it's because I'm just going to deny who I am. That's actually the solution. And therefore there's no issue here, right? And so that to me is a situation where, even though a lot of times, this I find generally in like you know, when we talk about prestige filmmaking, especially in the Canadian sense, it's like maybe comedy or again, like positivity isn't seen as particularly cool. Yeah. But the thing is, to me, in a world where you are asked to perform your tragedy for a job, joy and positivity are acts of resistance. Those are political statements. To be able to maintain a sense of happiness or make people happy in the world that we're in is itself a radical political act. And it just makes things more accessible for people from my point of view. And I really like the idea of family sitting down together and having a good time, and that opening up your brain and kind of opening up the pores and letting in the new ideas, or just the idea that you can feel good about yourself. And what does that do to the rest of your day, to the rest of your work, and what you bring to it. So yeah, it's everything for sure.
Andy Hodgson is a director of photography, producer, and filmmaker based in Vancouver.
Now, when I say the words white supremacy, what does that evoke in you?
In general, in the film industry, I would say white stories, being ran by Caucasian people, who could potentially be slightly narrow-minded to telling stories that don't really see farther than other races.
Have you worked on a lot of projects that are told with the white gaze in mind?
Absolutely. Most projects that I specifically work on for others here in Canada and in Vancouver specifically, are based on white stories, set with white picket fences in suburbia, with the beautiful white couple. You know, the lead is white and the supporting lead is white, and they come together and they make a beautiful white family.
Yeah. What impact would you say that white supremacy and working in an industry that is built on this foundation of white supremacy has had on your career?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say at times I would feel myself being held back from telling the stories that I had wanted to tell, especially earlier in my career, just being bombarded with the sort of white supremacy storytelling that kind of held me back. And it sort of pigeonholes you into this section of filmmaking that you now have to work at this in order to make money, in order to advance your career by working in the white supremacy sort of aspect ratio. Speaking in terms of cinematography. I think earlier in my career, I was a little bit numb to it, you know, always questioning why isn't there more black cinematographers, or why isn't there more black directors, or not even black, just in general. It could be any race other than Caucasian. And specifically for actors, you know, seeing great actors when I would do my own indie features or my own indie shorts, and why they weren't given the space and the time to sort of even potentially step into the casting room to go for those specific roles that a white or a female or male would go for. So I think it was a little bit hidden for me, and I was kind of quiet about it just to kind of feel the industry and not ruffle any feathers to get my footing in. But as time went by, I began to find my voice, as well as others who inspired me to find my voice, who were either, of other races that were not Caucasian. And then seeing some particular black people on set, even as the number 4 on the call sheet, or number 5 on the call sheet, or the one-day players. Yeah. And to see that kind of uplifted me throughout my career, and then sort of now being able to speak openly about it, yeah, while we are on set, and seeing these changes dramatically happen. And specifically my own vision of where I'm moving as a filmmaker. As you know, I did my own black film, El Color Negro, last year, and which again speaks on behalf of all of that. And I had about 20 black actors on camera that I believe all deserve a chance to be in front of the camera in a Hallmark movie, or in a Lifetime movie, or a rom-com, or some of these bigger shows, the 100s and whatnot. So I think, yes, there had been silence, but now we're speaking a lot more in the open about it, and we are creating content as well to showcase that power.
In what ways have the film sets that you've been on, has the work that you've done, both service work and also your own work, has changed, in the last year specifically?
Yeah, in the last year, I'd say 0 to 100.
Yeah.
In the last year, I've seen and worked on more black films. One being The Blackter with Rekia Bernard.
Another guest in this series.
Perfect.
Of course.
She's amazing. After sort of being inspired by El Color Negro. So I think by me putting it out there to the Vancouver film industry that, we have our voices and we have the power to put what we would like to see on screen, kind of opened the gates to other filmmakers wanting to create, whether, again, I say not only black, Hispanic, multicultural, could be East Indian, sort of any other race. And I do speak about the Latinos as well, because I'm half Spanish myself, and I've gone to Central America and have produced my own films down there with subject matters that are aligned with racism and sexuality. So I think in the last year I've been very empowered to see where the new generation can take film, and the new generation being us in terms of mixed race, black race. In the last year, it has been quite eye-opening for me in terms of where we're going to be moving forward in the future in terms of black stories and Latino stories and other multicultural stories.
What do you want or expect from people who describe themselves as allies?
I think personally, the respect, also to be put at the same level as them, and for them to kind of dig deeper into the stories that we're trying to tell, and not this like sort of white picket fence romantic stories that are being told. Yeah. To sort of sit within our own power and to discuss those stories with us. I've had multiple Caucasian friends who have wanted to discuss El Color Negro with me, and I'm more than happy to explain to them, because I think without us putting it out there and without any explanation, perhaps they might be in a place that they feel like they cannot, communicate that to us. So
what have the questions about? Have they not understood? Have they been fearful, or? Yeah,
well, for example, like, what made you want to, what made you want to put this film together, right? And I think it was pretty upfront why, but I think they wanted to hear from me personally why I wanted to put it out there. Other questions that's like in terms of, you claim to be half black, half Spanish, how come you didn't have Spanish people in there? So things like that, right? Where I think they just misunderstand and misinterpret. But a simple explanation can sort of reel them back in,
What do you think our goal, and by our, I mean like the royal R, those of us who are committed to doing anti-racism work in the Vancouver film and television industry, what do you think our goal should be? Should it be that we are breaking everything down and rebuilding it anew, or is it about shifting hearts and minds and working and making adjustments to the system that we have, or some other option that I'm not presenting?
I mean, I don't think breaking it down and rebuilding it, but I do see it as breaking it down and advancing, right? So instead of rebuilding, in a way, BIPOC community has brought film to the forefront, because a lot of people don't want to see those Caucasian films anymore. So I think is advancing, is putting our foot down and moving forward with what we've been given, with the film industry that has been created, because I will say the film industry was created by Caucasians, but we now have the power to continue with that, right? So I think by this sort of thing of breaking it down or rebuilding makes me feel weak and powerless. So for me, it's more of advancing. It's more of a restructuring, something that empowers me, and sort of taking what has been given and making it our own. So I think if I was to go back, I would have liked to integrate my own culture and my own background as Latino and Black earlier in my career. But, there's a saying that we're right on time, and that time just wasn't for me. And the time is now, right? So yes, could I've definitely have sort of gathered more BIPOC filmmakers in the community to create more content that was more aligned with what we wanted. But at the time, I was also not in that mental headspace. But I would just go back to everything's right on time. So I think the building of the career has come to this moment to be able to tell these stories, these BIPOC stories. I think joy is a big one. Joy is creativity. Joy is a place where we can refine our work and be in this playground of sort of happiness, through the dark times. I remember specifically all the actors were coming in, they were so empowered by the fact that we were doing this in Vancouver in our own backyard, which I don't think this has been done in Vancouver before. I could be wrong, but a short film with that much power, with that much sort of intention to really grasp the audience and say, here we are, here's Black Lives Matter, and this is what we're doing about it. So we have to operate in joy, we have to operate in hope. My therapist a couple of months ago said we have to stop operating in fear and operate in the hope that's going to happen to us. And when he mentioned that, I walked away, and not that I was operating in complete fear, but at times it is fearful, racism, you don't know where it's going to come from. Is somebody going to say something about my hair, or on set, am I wearing the correct things, for example? So I think operating in hope, in the hope that we do have the power, in the hope that we do want to come out with these stories, and in the hope that white supremacy also listens to us and watches these and says, there is advancement in the BIPOC community. So
Thank you for joining us for Real Talk About Race in BC Film. Today's program was made possible with a grant from Human Rights Internet. Next time, we'll hear from community leaders who are working to enact industry-wide change. Until then, keep talking and keep listening.